Whenever the words government shutdown start trending, it's a huge signal to pay attention. We saw this whole thing play out in late 2025. And yeah, it left a lot of us feeling pretty on edge. So, what does a shutdown actually mean? Do the markets totally panic? And what's the real impact on everyday people? Well, let's break it all down.
Yeah, beyond all the political noise and the headlines, we're going to get into the real world impact. We're talking about what it means for your wallet and for the markets. We'll look at whether you're an investor or just a taxpayer, should really be watching for. So, to really get a grip on the impact, we first have to understand what a government shutdown even is. What's the mechanism that's failing behind the scenes to cause all this drama? Okay, so put simply, it's just a funding gap. Think of it like this. Congress holds the government's purse strings, and if they can't agree on a budget, those are called appropriations, then the money legally just stops flowing. It's like the tap gets turned off, and that forces federal agencies to halt all non-essential work, sending a lot of people home without pay. That's what a furlough is. And this right here, this is the ticking clock that sets the whole thing in motion. The government's financial year ends on September 30th. So if there isn't a new budget, or even just a temporary patch to kick the can down the road, that's what a continuing resolution is, then at the stroke of midnight on October 1st, bam, the shutdown officially kicks in. And look, this isn't just some abstract concept. Let's use the late 2025 shutdown as a real-world case study to see exactly how this whole process can grind to a halt and what the fallout really looks like. That whole event was the perfect example of a long, drawn-out stalemate. I mean, it didn't just happen overnight. It came after months of lawmakers just using these temporary fixes to delay the inevitable until, finally, the negotiations completely broke down, and that led to a really long, multi-week shutdown. So, this is the crucial part. We need to understand where the pain is felt first. When the government turns off the lights, who's left bearing the immediate burden? Well, the impact starts with hundreds of thousands of federal employees. They're either sent home or, in some cases, forced to work without knowing when they'll see their next paycheck. But the pain spreads out from there like a ripple in a pond. Government contractors suddenly get stop work orders. Small businesses that depend on federal contracts face a huge cash flow crisis. And everyday citizens start to feel it through delays in everything, from getting a passport to visiting a national park. And this quote really hits home the personal side of it all. Now, while a law passed in 2019 does guarantee that federal workers will eventually get their back pay, that doesn't help you pay the mortgage or buy groceries right now. That immediate cash crunch creates some very real, incredibly stressful situations for families all across the country. Okay, so let's zoom out from that ground level pain and look at the bigger picture. When a shutdown hits, does the whole economy grind to a halt? Do the markets totally freak out? Or is it a different story? Make no mistake about it, the economic damage is real. The Congressional Budget Office, or CBO, they're the nonpartisan number crunchers for Congress, they estimated that the long shutdown back in 2018-2019 cost the U.S. economy about $11 billion in lost output. And some of that economic activity, well, it's just gone forever. And the key variable here is always duration, time. A short shutdown might just cause a little dip in economic growth. But as this chart shows, a longer shutdown, say 4 weeks or more, can shave 1 to 2 full percentage points off quarterly GDP growth. The longer it drags on, the deeper the cut. Now, here's where things get really fascinating. There's this disconnect between what happens to the economy and how the markets react. While that economic cost is crystal clear, financial markets have historically treated shutdowns differently. We might see some short-term volatility, some bumps in the road, as uncertainty spikes. But the long-term performance, often only mildly affected. Why? Well, because investors have seen this movie before, and they tend to work on the assumption that a deal eventually will get done. Okay, so knowing that markets tend to get the short-term jitters, but don't usually go into a long-term panic, how should an investor approach this situation? Well, here's a simple 4-step playbook for navigating all that uncertainty. All right, first and most importantly, don't overreact. A shutdown is a messy political fight over spending. It's not a crisis where the US government is about to default on its debt. That's a whole different beast. Second, keep a really close eye on the duration. The market's patience gets thinner and thinner the longer this goes on.
Third, this is a great time to review your own portfolio. See which companies you own are heavily reliant on government contracts. And finally, if you are invested in those kinds of businesses, you need to ask yourself, how would they handle a 30 or even a 60-day freeze in their revenue? So to wrap this all up, the bottom line is this. A government shutdown creates very real, very measurable hardship for people and for the economy. But for the financial markets, history shows it's usually treated more like a temporary shock. It's like a bout of political theater, where investors are betting that at the end of the day, a deal will be reached. It's not usually seen as a fundamental long-term crisis. And that leaves us with a final and pretty important question to think about. If markets can largely shrug off a temporary funding gap, what happens when the fight isn't just about the budget? What happens when it's about the full faith and credit of the United States? Because a fight over the debt ceiling, where the ability of the US to pay its bills is truly on the line, well, that could be an entirely different and frankly, a much more dangerous story.